Emma Martin wrote a few years ago, I have never understood why the agenda in respect of data protection has been so hidden. It seems entirely counterproductive for it to remain so. And what she was talking about in terms of that agenda is a quote that Emma Martins shares quite a lot. She shared it in that piece that she wrote. She shared it in the keynote at the Hive Live 2024. She shared it at DPAS recently. She does share it a lot. And she always says, oh, I'm really sorry you've seen this before. And I said, please don't apologise. I absolutely love seeing this again and again, because we need to talk about this. We need reminded of this over and over again. And even if the only, in inverted commas, thing that it does is give me a renewed sense of purpose and why it's so important that we do the job that we do, I think it's really, really valuable. So, as I say, I don't like to have lots of text, but I did want to include this whole quote from former Information and Privacy Commissioner for British Columbia, David Flaherty, who is now no longer with us, but he, again, was really good at kind of putting these things into words the same way that Emma is. And he said, European data protection laws include the hidden agenda of discouraging a recurrence of the Nazi efforts to control the population, and so seek to prevent the reappearance of an oppressive bureaucracy that might use existing data for nefarious purposes. This concern is such a vital foundation of current legislation that it is rarely expressed in formal discussions. This helps to explain the general European preference for strict licensing systems of data protection. Thus, European legislators have reflected a real fear of Big Brother based on common experience with the potential destructiveness of surveillance through record keeping. None wish to repeat the experiences endured under the Nazis during World War II. Every time I read that, it sends shivers. The fact that it is a hidden agenda, as Emma says, a bit counterintuitive for it to be hidden. But the way David Flaherty explains it is that it's rarely expressed because it's so obvious. So this is what he's talking about. This is where it kind of all started. And this, again, this is an image that Emma uses that I think is really, really powerful. That we have got here German women at work in 1933, and they are producing census and data and records of the population. And one of the things that they have to use as an indicator is to identify who are the Jewish members of the population. And this is 1933, so obviously this was when we were working up to World War II. And as part of that, this is from the also wonderful Dara O'Brien, who again has a wonderful way of picking these things out. And he talks about a guy called René Carmille. Again, that's a hyperlink, and it's the link down the bottom there. And talking about this gentleman, he says he realised early on that the recording of data such as religion could lead to misuse or abuse. And he resisted the collection of this data in the national census in France, where he was working, on the grounds that France was a secular nation and therefore civil census didn't need to know about people's religion. So, of course, then France was occupied by the German forces, and he was still working under the Vichy government. I don't know if I'm even pronouncing that right, but his statistical services office was ordered by the occupying forces to use their national registration scheme to help identify Jewish people living in France. However, using a combination of work to rule tactics and sabotage of the actual tabulation machines, Carmille managed to at least slow the plans of the Nazis, as they had to rely on manual records. So they had all these, very, very early computers, I guess, in the sense of the word, and they wouldn't they're making it hard for the Nazis, which is great. But the last line there, that he died in the Dachau concentration camp in January 1945. Obviously, he didn't see out the end of the war, but he made a huge difference in what way he could. Which brings us to today. And I've been struck by quite a few of these types of images that I've seen across the internet the last few days, especially since we had President Zelensky at the White House being bullied basically by Trump and Vance. And it's easy to look at these images and kind of think, well, that's ancient history. But it's not. It's really, really not. We've got Elon Musk, the unelected power, as that he is, doing Nazi salutes, and he's not the only one. It isn't that far away, and we've got it happening we've got it happening in Britain as well. We have got a far-right movement in Britain and in Europe and loads of places. So it does scare me. And actually, what's the worst that could happen, is one of the things that I like to say a lot, not in a doom and gloom way, but when we're looking at data protection impact assessments or, risk assessments of any type, and you've got somebody with a new project or a new policy, a new piece of software, a new anything, and with the people that I work with, they're in housing associations and other third sector type organisations. We are the good guys, but we have to remember that there are bad guys out there as well, and we've got to put ourselves in their shoes and consider, actually, if we weren't, if this data or this process got into the hands of the bad guys, how could it be misused and abused? What is the worst that could happen? And that can be quite challenging, because we do, as I say, we kind of go, well, we're doing this for the good of the residents or the good of our colleagues. But we have to think about the other side of that and weigh those things up. The easiest way to keep data secure, even if you are only considering GDPR and data protection from a security point of view, which is absolutely crucial, of course. The easiest way to keep data secure is to not have it in the first place, which is what Camille was saying about, well, we don't need this information. It could be misused and abused, this religious data. We are a secular state, so we don't need that. And that is the easiest way to keep it secure, because the best technology in the world can always be, can be beaten in terms of security. But if we don't have it in the first place, it's a lot easier. And then it also doesn't cost us any money to store it. It doesn't have any environmental costs, and all the rest of it that goes with storing data. Let's have some good news. So, the good news is that all of these things here on this page are things that the third sector, the charities, the housing associations that I work with, that you work with and you work in, care about. If you look at the vision, mission and value statements on all of the organisations that I just mentioned, on their websites and in their reports, you will find that they care about integrity, transparency, doing the right thing, not storing things forever because there is an environmental cost. They care about the law, they care about being fair, accountability, all of these things. Accurate and up to date and relevant and necessary there in the middle. They are the main issues that are coming up from the Housing Ombudsman reports about key knowledge and information management, that the information was either inaccurate or it wasn't there. They couldn't get hold of it. It was hidden in a drawer and nobody knew it was there. There are cases where Housing Ombudsman is trying to investigate a complaint and the housing association can't even produce records that backs up their side of the story or any side of the story. They'll say, oh yeah, we did do the survey. Okay, so let's see a copy of the survey report. Oh, we can't find it. Well, have you got records that show when it was done? No, we can't find that. We know that that's a problem in just doing the day-to-day business. And of course, you will note these are all from Article 5 of the GDPR. These are what data protection is all about. It isn't just security. It's all of these things. And all of these things relevant to the purpose. You know, how accurate does something need to be? It's more important if it's the amount of rent somebody's paying versus, I don't know, have you got an extra dot in the middle of their postcode? I don't know. I'm making things up, but it will depend on what it is. I told you I've not slept much the last few days. You'll come up with better examples than me. So how do we use that good news and where do we go from here? So I wanted to just pick up slightly on the Data Use and Access Bill, which is making its way through Parliament at the moment. And it does stick to more or less the GDPR, but it does add something called digital verification services. Now, we could probably have a whole session just on what that might look like, and obviously the risks of that are what we've talked about at the beginning here. It is not ancient history. This could be our present and our future. How is this going to actually work in practice, and where could it be misused and abused? Just because something's digital doesn't make it infallible. You know, we seem to have this interest in making everything digital because that will be better. But it's not magically better. A lot of work needs to go in to make sure it's done fairly, lawfully, transparently, and all the rest of it. So draw a line under that and move on to how do we go forward from here. Just to say the Data Use and Access Bill, at the moment, they are expecting it to be, I think, April, which I thought was ages away, but that's next month, that might actually come in. However, I will always say, you've heard me say this before, let's not panic, let's not throw everything out, let's not worry about making sure that we reword our policies and make sure that it's kind of got all the right, it says DUA instead of GDPR, or as well as, sorry, GDPR. Let's not panic about that. It's the principles, it's the core principles that we've got from data protection that we need to rely on and we need to lean into. Again, an old story, you've probably heard this before if you've seen me talk before, but when I first handed my notice in at the housing association I worked at in 2017, summer of 2017, or spring, I think it was, I handed my notice in, and my director, sort of trying to talk me out of it, I think, said, but what will you do for work after the 25th of May next year? Because everybody will have done GDPR and they won't need you anymore. And I was, grateful that he cared, but I also pointed out that we had the Data Protection Act 1998 for almost a decade at that point. And we, as a large organisation, and so many others, were not compliant with it at all. Not at all, I shouldn't say that, but we were not doing everything we should be. There were definitely gaps and there were risks that needed managed on a daily basis. It's the same with GDPR. I don't think we can kind of go, oh yeah, tick GDPR or tick the Data Use and Access Bill. We are done. It is a journey, and there may be mountains ahead, but I would encourage everyone to just lean into and to focus on those positives that we know everybody wants. We want to make data-driven decisions, which should be based on accurate, relevant data, so that we can make purpose-driven, data-driven decisions. We want the business running smoothly. Whenever there is a large data breach, even if it's an attack and it doesn't actually get any data out, we've seen housing associations have to close down their systems for weeks, even months, while they battle that. So security and integrity are absolutely vital. Do we want to reduce costs and carbon? Yes, we do. And so that means we only want to have relevant data and we don't want to store it forever. So those are kind of the good news, I think, the things that we can share and the things that we can lean into, and hopefully avoid people just glazing over when we talk about GDPR or data protection. So that's me. And again, you'll get these slides. So please do connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not already connected, and you can contact me there. The Data in Social Housing is the membership that a lot of you that are here today are members of, and anyone else, even if you're not in social housing, you would get a very, very, very warm welcome. You can find more about that on the website there. And our sort of tagline is community collaboration and continued learning, which is what I try to do with the Hive as well. So we come back in the room. I'm interested. Have you heard that being talked about before, that is the kind of the origins of data protection? Is that new to you? Is it useful, most importantly?
Well, as you know, Claire, I have heard that before, and I try to use it with colleagues to get them to understand. But how do you get people who just don't understand? How do you get them to do any of this? And you know, we were talking in a top level board last week that actually we need to be taking disciplinary measures with some of them, because they are causing a huge amount of risk.
Yeah, and it's about that risk to people and trying to draw that comparison, that is connecting the dots, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's, which I think and I hope that these examples do help with.
I think, you know, I see the same thing, same challenge. I think for me, digital literacy is poor across the whole of the UK. I've got lots of statistics about, you know, the general digital literacy. Forget about the piece that we're working in and the level that we're trying to educate people. And I think genuinely some of these people that we can't reach is because they don't actually understand what happens behind their keyboard and the screen. They have no concept at all. It is such an alien universe when we talk to them about anything around data, because they just don't believe it's real. And they just can't grasp those concepts. And I'm sorry, it's not their fault. They've not been educated in that. They might be 40 odd, and no, only kids now are getting education around digital stuff. So I think that age group, my son's age, 34 and up, between 30 and 50 are a terrible group, because they've been using this technology without any education whatsoever. We were the first generation of parents to give our kids mobile phones when they weren't smartphones, and they've just grown up and upgraded, and they have no concept of the digital world. So when we try and educate them about data, they just don't have the fundamental foundations. So we went back to basics with some of our training, and you know, a GDPR course, 2/3 of it is around about the digital world we live and we work. It's about their personal lives, and then it's about their digital lives. So we hit them in their heart. We hit them in the heart about, you know, this is real, it's here, it's now, it's not just on film and video. These are the real human consequences when things go wrong. And actually, we've been going to see a change round in engagement then from some of the people who've been hard to reach, because it becomes real. And I think that for me is one of the things that we've struggled with until, you know, a couple of years ago.
Do you agree, Chris, that there's this feeling that digital means safe and better? I'm just reminded of the meeting that we were both in recently with a client, where I can't remember if it was the chair or it was one of the board members, and he said, you know, the risk he was concerned about was, do we still have paper documents, paper records? And Chris and I were both kind of, well, that's kind of not that scary if we do. You know, that's not the worry. It's more, do we have stuff we shouldn't have? Do we know things about people that could be misused and abused about them?
Yeah, but the other interesting thing in that conversation with the board then was one of the other gentlemen on the board said, actually, when he got it, the penny dropped in the meeting. Yep. He said, I've been worried about, and he's a board member across lots of different organisations, is that he said, I've been worried about all of this data and cyber stuff is about stopping people getting in. So you think of a wall, he said there's people can't get in, and we're doing a reasonably good job of that. He said, I've just realised what you're saying is the wall is porous in the opposite direction. So here we can let data go out of our organisation. We've got no control over it. The penny only then in that meeting dropped. And he's been in meetings after meetings, and he's not daft. He's not, no. He's a very clever man. He's got lots of experience, but the penny only dropped then. And that's one of many, many hundreds of thousands of boards and people we need to reach.
No, I think it is that that thing of walking it through an actual situation that we had from Renee. I'm not going to mispronounce his name
Camille.
Thank you. Where he was actually in France, and it was the French government that was saying, you know, go out and collect this data. And he pushed against collecting the religious data. And then the Nazis came and took over and occupied. And he suddenly has obviously made a really good decision, because they haven't got that data that the Nazis wanted, first of all. So it slowed their progress at the very least. So it's that thing of, we see ourselves as the good guys. How could it be a problem to store religion or ethnicity or sexuality? Because we're not going to misuse it. But we don't know. Hopefully we're not going to be occupied by the Nazis, but the way things are going. Sorry, lack of sleep makes me quite dark. But we don't know what could happen. We don't know if you have got somebody in your organisation who might want to sabotage, or who just does something silly with the data. And so, like you say, it's that porous wall the other way, and it gets sent out to someone accidentally, or they get, they get manipulated into sharing that data, or we get, our organisation gets taken over by a different organisation, and we've got a new set of leaders, and we don't know them. Hopefully they're still the good guys, but we just don't know. And it comes back to that. I just want to pick up on a comment in here that somebody doing a data protection information governance apprenticeship and the origins of data protection are covered in an early class, which I love, but it's good to go over it again. And it underlines how important it is, and how at its heart it's about protecting people. Absolutely. I get very frustrated, and you've again heard me say this a lot, that data protection just sounds like it is data security, but it's people protection. The easiest way to protect your data is to keep it secure. It's not have it in the first place. Let's not collect it in an identifiable way. If it could be misused, it could be abused. I'll just remind again, for anyone that hasn't heard me going on about this, in the housing sector at the moment especially, we have got people pushing back and saying, but the regulator says we've got to collect this data. So we absolutely must do, and we can't argue with it. That isn't necessarily true. They are telling us we must collect relevant data, and we must be able to see if we are being fair. It does not mean that we need all the protected characteristics of all our tenants. And most importantly, it doesn't mean that we need it connected to individuals in our databases. Anonymous collection is much, much more safe than secure and can't be misused and abused in the same way that actually connecting it to an individual or a household in our databases. And I have it in writing. In fact, I'm putting it out on LinkedIn, and it's been shared amongst the DISH members, exactly what the regulator staff have said to me about how it's up to each individual housing association to identify their purpose for the data and their lawful basis. And they're kind of saying, well, you must collect some data, but you've got to be really, really clear about what you're going to do with it and why, and comply with all the rest of the GDPR requirements when you do that. So that's going out on LinkedIn, I think, tomorrow, and it's already been shared with the DISH members. But I just think it's so important to get that message out that if you are concerned about your organisation's approach to this, and you see those warning signs that are just going, oh yeah, well, we'll just stick it in the CRM next to everybody's name, we'll put their sexuality on their disability. Well, disabilities is slightly different if we need to do something about it, but we'll put their sexuality and we'll put their religion. That is a pushback. The regulator does not say we have to collect it all. They absolutely do not say that we have to put it next to their names as well.
Yeah, it's a bit like credit card information.
Mm-hmm.
That you can't put credit card information against a name.
Yeah. When you collect credit cards for payment, absolutely, that should be done in a secure line. We shouldn't be just writing them down or putting it in somebody's CRM record.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And anything that's sensitive, we should be really carefully thinking about how are we storing it. And because some of the systems, the way they're built, aren't great, and we just keep adding fields, it ends up that we go, well, the easiest way to do it is we'll just stick it in the CRM, and it's not ideal, to say the least.